How are we looking? Welcome back, everybody. Just going to check in on the chat here. We've got some folks in already. Nice to see and hear from everyone. We've got an amazing show tonight. Welcome back to Brave New North. We weren't sure how it was going to go, but they ended up calling an election, and I figured that this is a good place for us to kind of air our grievances with the process that has happened. My name's Sean Conway. This is Brave New North. It is August the 15th, and it's the first day of the 44th Canadian general election. As Colton Kyle says in the chat, I am just dreading the next 30 some odd days. I'm not necessarily dreading them all. I was listening to a friend of mine today, and they described election season is basically like our playoffs. So people that are avid political followers, I think it's going to be a really interesting election. I watched all of the parlor intrigue this morning with the Prime Minister going to the Governor General's house, Rideau Hall, and it was an interesting thing. And we'll get into that with our very special guests we have today. Again, this is Brave New North. We're here for the 44th Canadian general election. My name is Sean Conway. I'll be your host through this. I'm not sure how many shows we're going to be doing, probably a lot through the next couple of weeks. But we'll try to do something whenever things happen. And I think there's going to be a lot of things happening over the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Valid point as well, Jay. Nice to see you in here as well. I think we can get into our show because our fantastic guests are here already. This is E36, folks. There's 36 more days. September the 20th is going to be polling day in Canada. Of course, is advanced and mail-in, all of that. You can get all that information on the Elections Canada website. Talk to your local returning officers or your local campaigns. Speaking of local campaigns, it is great to reconnect with some fantastic folks who are running for office in this election. We're going to have a conversation tonight with the Oshawa New Democratic Party candidate, Shailene Panylo, and as well as the Kitchener Centre NDP candidate, Beisan Zubi. And I'm going to pull them into the stream now if we're ready. I think we are.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going great. Shailene, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Well, congratulations, I think, are in order. Here we've made it. We made it. I think, unfortunately, but we're here anyways. Thank you both so much for taking some time to come and talk to us and all the fantastic humans out on the internet listening. I know you're going to be very busy for the next couple of weeks, and really appreciate you both taking the time to have a little bit of a conversation about the election.
I'm excited.
Oh, thanks for having us. Yeah, no, this is fantastic.
Sean was asking if we'd met, and I think we kind of crossed paths almost at the March for Truth and Justice, but I didn't get to introduce myself. So it's nice even digitally to be.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, I'm in my
when I saw a photo that you had been there, I was like, oh,
don't mind
nice.
It's nothing like your gorgeous background.
That's okay. I know
what's behind you. Is that the orange tsunami?
Yeah.
I believe it is.
So awesome. It's almost done, but that is, it's me and then our orange wave. So yes, we'll share more photos, but this is your sneak peek, folks. So awesome. Yeah.
I think that Beisan said that she wanted to give us a tour of the office quickly.
So this is crazy because we did not have a campaign office 3 days ago. Everything just happened so quickly. But we saw it on Saturday, saw it on Sunday, and then signed the lease on Tuesday, and then we started painting on Thursday, and it was a dark blue like game store. So this is my office. As you can see, it's, you know, it's very glamorous. But then there's just like a whole team of, oh, I shouldn't go too far in. Wait, how do you see behind me? That's doing a sign team right now, and it's just alive and doing all these kinds of cool office things. So that was just a really cool moment that I had personally. This is my first time running, so I didn't have the experience in, you know, in 2019 of having all this stuff. So it's just kind of wild that things are just happening as I'm sitting in a closet and chatting with people on an iPad. So that's happening.
Awesome. Well, congratulations. That's very exciting. Looks awesome.
Well, we're trying. It's, yeah. We were talking about the like nice office space versus fixer upper kind of dichotomy of how do you kind of plan a campaign space.
Yeah, it's the energy that you bring into it.
I agree.
It really
As
sets
people,
the tone.
for sure.
Yes. I
agree with that 100%. It's all about the energy that you bring to things, and I've seen offices that were fixer uppers. I've seen some that were really, really nice, and at the end of the day, it's all about the attitude when you go in, and I think it's going to be exciting. Maybe I'll come and I'll do a comparison side by side of both the offices over the next couple of weeks. You never know. I travel a lot more than I should these days, but let's start with maybe just some basic introductions. Maybe Beisan, we'll start with you. You're a first-time guest here on the show, but maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Beisan Zubi. I'm running in Kitchener Center. I am 35 years old, and this is my dog, Luna, who kind of just is, you know, attached to me. And so we're going to deal with some pandemic puppy attachment issues during this campaign for sure. I work as a social responsibility consultant and equity consultant here. So I've been working with startups, but after the pandemic, I actually kind of pivoted, which is such a startup word, to working with nonprofits and boards of directors. So now I'm doing more in the board director training space, which I'm really, really enjoying. I founded a nonprofit board of directors matching program last year for Black, Indigenous people of color here in Kitchener Center. And I ran for regional council in 2018 here as a counselor. And that was just really, you know, really fun and really exciting, but very different than this. And so this has been a very, first time candidate. But I used to actually work for the NDP. So I guess I should probably, I went right out of university. My first job after I graduated from Concordia in creative writing and poli-sci was working for the NDP in 2011 on that election campaign. So basically like fresh out of undergrad, I'm brought into this meeting of, you know, the higher ups, and I guess they wanted somebody who was young and knew how to Google. It was 2011. And so there was, you know, a certain kind of internet savviness, I guess, that I brought to the role, just being young and having had to, you know, you just graduated and did a lot of Wikipediaing, you know, as a university student. And so, they hired me, and it was one of those really kind of, everything kind of worked out really well because we were in an election like 2 months after I was hired, but I was brought on to be an oppo researcher, a rapid response researcher. So helping, you know, the NDP frame and position, you know, opponents. And I was really fortunate that my internet skills came in very handy in that election. And so that kind of helped me, you know, grow within the NDP. So I spent a couple years, you know, working with people who are still there, which is really cool. So when I went back to Ottawa, I saw Charlie Angus and Alexandre Larice, and they were people who I worked with when I was really young. And so that was a kind of really cool full circle moment. But yeah, now I'm running in Kitchener Center. And so I had I got rent-evicted from my apartment in January, and I got a call in February asking if I would run, and I didn't have a home. Like, I was living at my parents' house, and I was just very, you know, I didn't know where I was going. And then I got that call, and it was exactly what I needed. And it definitely put me here. And I think everything is coming together really nicely. And this is just a really exciting moment. So yeah, that's it just feels like an interesting kind of full circleness. And I'm thinking a lot about Jack Layton, like recently, and I worked for Jack, and I got to actually be, working on a campaign, with him, and he was my boss. And so I'm thinking a lot about 10 years later, right? And August 22nd is going to be the 10-year anniversary of his passing. And it's just so weird. Like, I'll be having a fundraiser with my dad where he teaches people how to make hummus like 10 years later. And it's just, so that's also kind of, yeah, it's just pretty, I'm kind of one of those people that likes signs, or like thinks about kinds of, full circle moments and synergies and how things kind of work out, and this just feels like that. So it's been a really cool kind of experience for me, just running.
Yeah, and thank you so much for doing so. I think it's always great when we have, optimistic and capable people that are running for office and doing everything they can. So, again, thank you for that. I think it's one of the craziest things that you can do, is to put your name forward. I did it a few years ago, and it's just such an exhilarating time. Shailene, maybe the same question for you, for any newbies that may be in watching tonight or over the next couple of weeks. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And look, I even remembered to unmute this. So hi folks. I can't see the chat right now, but I will go and reread after. But I'm Shailene Panylo. I'm your federal NDP candidate here in Oshawa. So this is our second go. I was also our candidate in 2019. So we are back at it again, less than 2 years later, which is such a surreal feeling because one, I don't think we were expecting it to happen this quickly, but certainly two, it's such a different feeling than it was in 2019 for a lot of reasons, but ultimately it's a better feeling, at least here. So I think that we're going to see, some big changes here, and I really, really hope that's the case. That's the energy. That's what it's telling me. But for a little bit about me, well, geez, I grew up in Oshawa for the majority of my life, all but a year or two. And I had a really rough experience growing up here. I think, Sean, we've chatted a little bit about this maybe on previous shows, right? And so it was really important for me once I hit high school to, my motto is be the role model that I could have used. And it comes down to, Oshawa is a place that has changed a lot in the last 15 years, let alone in the last year. And I'm very proud to have gotten to be part of that change. But there are a lot of hardworking people here who have done a lot of work long before I've even come to exist, who I think were also ready to hand off the torch and see, younger folks step in and step up. And in 2019, when I was sort of, pushed in this direction because someone else saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself just yet, and I realized I could use a little bit of my privilege to have a seat at the table or try to get a seat at the table, it really changed how I viewed community service. I've always been involved in the nonprofit and the youth, specifically working with youth sector. I'm the director of a not-for-profit in the Durham region. I've worked as a researcher. I've worked with government relations coordinating. I've worked as a consultant as well for EDI, or Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. I've been a little bit of a boat rocker here in the region for a great number of years, but it's all because it's worthwhile. And so at the center of that, you learn how important community is. But I think politics has sort of divulged so far away from this idea of community action, community mobilization, and participation that people just got hung up on partisanship and not on the greater vision. And that for me is really difficult to see because, I'm 24, so I'm still fairly young. I get reminded quite often outdoors, but it's my generation and the folks coming after me are going to go through hardships that they truly shouldn't have to. And just because I did, it doesn't mean I want anyone else to have to. And so when we make decisions today that impact generations from now, I think that is the most responsible way. And that is sort of the price that we owe people who are coming after us, right? To improve it a little bit more. So I really wanted to bring that community connection, that little bit of voice to politics here, just because my experience in Oshawa wasn't always being that part of a community. And so really, sorry, we've got our volunteer team coming in here. We're doing our sound blitz tonight. So, it was just, for me, this was really an opportunity because I do believe that better is so possible. We know that, we've seen it. And I think people here are ready for a change. And I don't know if you're feeling that in your ridings too, but there is like that rumbling, that energy that is shifting, shaping, and changing. And I love it. I'm ready to run with it. But ultimately, I think our experiences are our greatest teachers. And you really have to constantly reflect on where you've come from and then where you want to go. And for me, I resonated the most with the NDP, and I'm really, really proud to be able to do this again. I'm really honored and humbled that people trusted me to do this again. And this time we're going to work for a different outcome. So ultimately, I'm super excited. I'm so excited to be here and get to meet folks because it is hard when we're all virtual and spread apart. But it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. I hope I sprinkled in enough about me. I tend to gush about my city.
No, I think it's fantastic, and I think that's a great sort of gateway into the next thing that I wanted to talk to you both about is just looking back at the events of the day. So this morning at 10 o'clock, Justin Trudeau makes his way to Rideau Hall to ask the Governor General to dissolve Parliament and to issue the writs of election. So that happened. We got the speech from Mr. Trudeau, and I think a lot of people in the punditry class and in the political class and people that are Hill watchers, they look to the speeches that come um, after a parliament is dissolved for being able to phrase what the ballot box question is, and a lot of folks talk about like what's going to be the ballot question, and all leaders in those first couple of speeches get a chance to try to frame what that is. I think that Mr. Trudeau's framing of the ballot box question was a total miss. I think as well with Mr. O'Toole, an even bigger miss. And it just seems like we're in this situation where um, he's trying to justify the early election, a snap election. He's not going to be able to do it. And I think we're going to have to move on from that and actually look at what the ballot box question is. And I think that's ultimately where Jagmeet Singh did really, really well today, in my opinion, in framing the ballot box question around how are we going to make life better for people, who's going to pay for it, um, and I think that that's great because it leads to some of the tenets of social democracy that we all know and love: affordability, justice in the economy, indigenous rights, sovereignty, all of those pieces. And I honestly think that the NDP is at an advantage here, having already released a platform, and it's a very, very fulsome platform, longest one I've seen in a long while, over 100 pages of policy commitments. So I think that's good, but I still don't think that the electorate writ large has really decided what that ballot box question is. So I wanted to ask you both, and maybe we'll start with you, Shailene, what you see the ballot box question being.
Yes, this is a great question. I think it's changed for me too, even over the last few days. I think initially, folks thought it was going to end up being, a referendum on how the pandemic was handled. But I don't necessarily think that folks are going to stay in that mindset of it being sort of an opportunity to punish the Liberals for their responses or reward the Liberals for their responses, right? I think it's going to come down to a vision for future and a roadmap out of this mess. And that's going to be really, really difficult to frame because no one really has the answers. We are staring down in most provinces, but in more, they're staring right at it. We're staring down the barrel of a fourth wave. We don't know what comes after that. We are also looking at return to school, return to work. Folks are starting to go back in person to things. We're looking at, international debates on vaccine eligibility and travel. We're looking at, people touting, anti-vax, pro-vax. How do this whole idea of segregation based on vaccine status? You're seeing so many different conversations that I don't think it's going to be so much a conversation of what has happened, but rather what needs to. And that is, unless you have a crystal ball, that's a very hard answer to set yourself up for. I think what folks should be looking for, and I hope they do, is who is going to provide the tools needed to build whatever it is that we need to find our way out of this mess. I think it's going to be less of a specific roadmap and more of those tools and who is instilling hope. I think that's something that, Jagmeet and the NDP have going for us, just because we do tend to think systemically more than, band-aid solutions for systemic problems. I think we've seen that a lot over the last year. Socially, we do care about the value of, the intrinsic value of social well-being, of community, of everyone thriving and doing well, and not just a select few. And so when you start addressing systems and barriers, you're more likely to have longer lasting impact, right? As opposed to another tax credit here or a cut there or a one-time payment of this. Those things don't work. Sure, they got us through the pandemic, but we have to think bigger than that and bolder. And I don't think folks are going to be as content with, a measure that's going to be introduced with one government and then overlooked and cut the next. I think they're going to be looking for those bigger, more meaningful systemic changes. And again, who is providing the tools in the toolbox that we need to build what that solution looks like and keep rebuilding it as we go, because we don't have the answers for everything and we don't know what's going to happen. So it comes down to preparation, having a good arsenal. And I think that is definitely something we've already been thinking a lot about, talk a lot about, and are well situated to do.
Thank you for that. Beisan, same question. What do you think the ballot box question is going to be?
I would kind of say it is about that equitable recovery, and it is about where we go from here. I think everybody kind of knows there will be investments that are made when we're positioning ourselves exiting from this and trying to avoid a recession, trying to, invest in different types of, economic and social investments. But I think that we need to kind of emphasize where those investments go and who those investments are going to be benefiting. Because I think what we've seen is, people becoming more and more aware, especially in the last couple of years, exactly how the displacement of wealth has happened and where that loss has been found. And so I do think that what the NDP is talking about with a wealth tax and with, with looking at kind of those large corporate wasters and just like and like sucks, really. How are we as a society looking to invest back into people and invest back into like workers, into children, into our health, into our communities, into infrastructure and all of that. So I think that's kind of the questions that I'm really seeing of some people, they worked throughout the entire pandemic, whether it was from home or whether, they actually never even had the option to work remotely. And so for them, it's not necessarily this kind of pre, middle, post kind of experience. It's all been happening this whole time. And so we really need to be addressing their material situation right now. And you know, I'm talking to older people who are getting way less in their GIS and CPP. I'm talking to renters who are completely priced out, and young families who really want to stay and build their lives in Kitchener Center. But then in the last year, housing prices alone, the cost of a single family house has gone up $200,000 in 1 year in my riding. It's just I have no chance of buying. I make, you know, I make a decent living, but I have no, as a single person, have no opportunity to even enter into the housing market here in Kitchener. Because it's gotten that kind of out of control. And so I hear a lot of questions about affordability, affordable housing, how people are paying, you know, every single way, right? And so when we are talking about affordability and what Shailene was talking about with the systemic solutions, that's really where I'm feeling that kind of that magic, that connection at the door, because you talk about affordability and people, you know, you relate it to the cost of your rent, and why are we allowing, you know, housing, a human right, to become a profit and to be something that you could just lose at any moment and you know, not have any recourse for. But then that's related to, well, if we say how, like, our health is a right and we have health care, then how come our mental health isn't covered? And how come when we have prescriptions, and how come people who are, you know, sick, the sicker you are, the more you're paying out of pocket oftentimes for you know, life-saving prescriptions. I know people who have, you know, diabetes, they have to pay hundreds of dollars a month in that equipment because that's not covered. So really looking at how our pharmacare and how our healthcare system is actually going to wrap around people and really give them the services that they need, especially, like, I'm thinking about my parents. You know, my mom's turning 70 next year, and I'm thinking about how we have an aging population, and I want to make sure that there are supports for them, because right now, if we're in a pandemic and this is a crisis, what about 10 years from now, when we have a much larger, older population who needs way more support, and we get a pandemic and we get a situation that falls out of our control, right? So we have the foresight right now of, this is what happened, this is what we can learn from, and this is what we don't want to repeat itself. But, you know, the fear is that we won't learn, and that we won't learn from our mistakes, and that we'll keep repeating those mistakes. So I think relating it all to the system changes, to the foundational changes, trickle down hasn't worked for anybody, and nobody's, you know, into that anymore, and really building from the bottom up and talking about, how do we build our social safety net back up in Canada? How do we make sure that if you are not able to work, that you still have a roof over your head, right? These are fundamental questions that as Canadians, we just haven't answered. We haven't been, you know, we haven't been held accountable for actually having an answer to these questions of, if somebody loses their job, do they deserve to lose their home? Yes or no? And, like, if they don't deserve to lose their home, what are we doing to stop that from happening? The silence, right? Because we don't have an answer. So I think if we frame the issue as housing is a human right, you know, being able to exist in the cities and not have to, you know, die trying to just make a living wage, that is your right. And I think we can really resonate with especially young people, but people from all walks of life, for who this system right now is not working. It's not tenable. It's not there for them. And so the problem is that those people are disenfranchised. And of course they are. They have been shown how little the system cares about them. And so we have to ask for their trust twice, right? Their trust to engage in the system, to trust, you know, to think that their vote would be meaningful, but to trust us to not be like the other politicians who have said things, or, you know, who have misled them, or who gave up when it got too hard, or whatever it is. And so it is an uphill battle when you're trying to make those connections. But I really think that the ballot box issue is, how do we do an equitable recovery that brings everyone along? Like, you know what I mean? We're only as strong as the most vulnerable people in our community. So really, how are we creating that foundation, that base, and lifting everybody up? it's complicated. It's not an easy little sound bite, but you can get there from so many ways. You know, if somebody's concerned about the cost of food, the cost of housing, if somebody's, you know, breaking their back trying to make a living wage, if somebody is worried about their parents who have been in long-term care, if somebody is worried about their children and their mental health, all of these things are related. So all of this brings us back to the equitable recovery. Yeah.
100%. I think you've both really sort of outlaid something that I've been thinking about all today in trying to find out what that is. You know, the Prime Minister or Mr. Trudeau this morning framing it that he needs a mandate. Well, the Canadian people gave him a mandate 2 years ago, and the mandate was you have to work together. And so that's not working for him anymore. He let the conversion therapy bill die at the Senate. Most legislation is now dead at the Senate. They were able to get things passed in the House, but funny enough, the Liberal Senate wasn't making anything happen for him. And he dissolved Parliament. He could have recalled, and we could have banned conversion therapy in Canada. And that is directly because of the actions of Mr. Trudeau today. So trying to frame the election as him needing a mandate, that Canadians need to be heard. They already have that, and I feel like he was trying to make the question like, do you want that basically, like, if you don't want the election, you're pro pandemic. And that was sort of the undertow of what I was getting from the Prime Minister today. But I don't think it's going to fly. And the framing of why he wants the election is not going to fly. People know that 65% of Liberal voters already agree that they don't want an election. 65% of Liberal voters don't even believe that he should have a majority government. And I think that that's a really, really interesting thing, because when you talk about what you're both describing, which are the systems of unaffordability, where the economy is rigged against working people, against disabled people, against Indigenous communities, people of color, the Black community, across Canada, there's a stacked deck against people who are just demanding fairness. And the system is set up in a way where, well, you look at the pandemic as a pressure cooker of the last 18 months, where all of these issues, housing affordability is a really great barometer for how working people are getting around in this country right now. As you said, Beisan, in your writing, prices going up $200,000. It's a universal change across the province and across the country, with massive upward transfers of wealth from working people to the banksters and billionaires and ruling class. We've seen that over the last 18 months. And it's time for people to start to not think about, oh, it's just an election so that Trudeau can get a majority and everything will be okay. It has to, and it's not a referendum on the handling of the pandemic. It's these people let this happen, and they didn't do anything about it. It took constant goading from the NDP and other opposition parties to have, the CERB extended, to have students even considered in a recovery benefit, in the wage subsidy. It should have been legislated better in a wage subsidy. Am I happy about how that went down? Absolutely not. But still, I thought it was a valuable thing. All of these measures are in place because the NDP was able to push for them. And Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party doesn't like being told what to do. He's the golden boy. It's his country. He inherited it from his dad and all of this sort of thing. And I just want to tie this back into because I can rant about Justin Trudeau all night, and I don't want to. But we frame things not around what Justin Trudeau is talking about. I think coming at it the way that Jagmeet did today is a really, really good way. But let's tie it into how our local ridings are doing. So, Beisan, in Kitchener Centre, all of these issues are going to be important. Dismantling the systemic issues that plague our communities. How does that look in a riding like Kitchener Center, and what are people telling you, and what needs to change, and how can we do that from your position as the future MP for Kitchener Center?
Well, Kitchener Center is located on the Haldimand Tract, which is, it's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. But the Haldimand Tract is just, I didn't know very much about the history of the tract, and then I started looking into it a couple of years ago. And I'm Palestinian. And I found these interesting kinds of similarities between the transfer of land, transfer of rights, Indigenous rights, the legislation of land, and then how that also erodes itself. And in finding out that and making that kind of connection just here in Waterloo region, which is all located across, along the Grand River, which is where the Haldimand Tract territory is defined along. Shaped my understanding of the universality of a lot of these kinds of systems, right? And so when we're talking about colonialism, how we're not talking about a unique kind of instance of it, usually we're talking about global systems. And it's actually more intuitive for me to think about, well, now when I think about colonial powers, that makes so much more sense when I think about why Canada behaves the way that it does with other kinds of countries. So I know that's a little bit of an aside, but I think that the thing about Kitchener Center is that it's having an awakening. It really is. Like, we had just a year ago in June, a 25,000 person strong Black Lives Matter march. And that is something that has never happened in this area. Like, it just has not. And the urgency, I think that young people, that racialized people, we have a large Syrian refugee community. We're a very diverse riding, and the way that the last years have been experienced, but I think that the diversity of experience of life in general is what's going to let this be, I think, a moment to change. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there because people are feeling it viscerally. You know what I mean? They want these changes. They want these things to change, and they want it to happen now. They're not patient. And so I do think that the Liberals misread the moment. I think that the calculation was seen as like, this is the time to consolidate power, when it was, and when it's not. We've been seeing just exactly how an effective minority government can work when you have that kind of collaboration and that kind of compromise that expands the scope of a policy, the effect of a policy. And so when you have more people at the table, when I talk to, anyway, so I do think that people are ready for these changes. I think that this moment, that kind of calculation is not going to bear true. I think people like minority governments. I don't hear very many people complaining about minority governments. And so, I don't know that that's going to be a compelling kind of reason for people to trust that this election needed to happen right now as case numbers are rising. And I'm thinking about older people, I know that different kinds of ridings, but we have a really great, senior population within the NDP EDA here, and we've been trying really, really hard to activate them. But even just like the technology of computers and all that stuff isn't intuitive to many of them. Phoning is really difficult to do just in just kind of their homes, and we can't necessarily offer them the safest space for them to come to and be at if they have those concerns. And so I just think that there is going to be a reaction to this that I don't think was anticipated by the Liberals. I don't think that people are seeing the need and seeing the same need that Prime Minister Trudeau saw of pushing us into this situation. Like you said, there was a lot of really important legislation that has died now. And a lot of it is on its second legs after, being, dying before in 2019. And so, especially that conversion therapy bill, which was really important. It was so close. And so it's just like, these are just the decisions that are made. And that's a calculation. And to be honest, when I was hearing about the people, I was hearing about the speculation of when the election will be called. And a lot of people were saying pensions. that's the magic date because that'll be the date that people get their pensions. I didn't really take that for very long or for very much, because I don't think that would have been the calculation. I think the calculation is just about consolidating power. And if that was not the time to do it, it would not have been the time that it would have happened. And if it was the time to do it, it would have happened then, but it would have nothing to do with people keeping their pensions. I'm a cynic. I just don't see that, like, that real compassion for the pensions of the politicians being that calculation when we're talking about power, money, like the system and protecting the status quo. It doesn't, like, 20 people's pensions were never the calculus. So I think, when they can throw away hundreds of thousands of pensions, they most certainly do not care about, a couple of politicians' pensions. So, I think that there's I think people like talking a lot in Canadian politics, and the pundit class is gonna pundit. But I think when you're talking to people at the door, they're not talking the same way as people who are, on the panels. They're really talking about, they're not happy, they're angry, they haven't been treated well, they haven't been listened to. And if you are asking people who that's how they feel to evaluate your work, I mean, okay, go for it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting angle that, I fall into the pundit trap a lot of the time. And it's going to be nice to be out on the doors and supporting my local candidate. But Shailene, just from the Oshawa perspective. So in Oshawa, what are some of the big issues that you're going to be out on the doors talking to community out? I see that you're canvassing already, and I imagine you just came back from canvassing before hopping on. But what's the mood in Oshawa? What are the issues? Oh, I think we're muted. It's a live show. These things happen.
I'll just chat for a second while we get
Okay.
Shailene back. I don't know very much about Oshawa, but I do know that Shailene has just been signed. I got the idea from Shailene. She had handwritten notes that she sent to all of her donors as thank yous. And so when I saw that she was doing that, that was, challenge accepted. And so how do we do that? So my hand turned into a bit of a claw at a certain point, but we've gotten about half of them done by now. So that was really great. I feel like I should have said that while Shailene was there, so she could have heard me giving props to her, to her approach to that. But you can just tell her that I said that when she comes back in the show. There she is.
Sorry, hi. You cut out halfway, so I missed what you said, but my phone started ringing, and I guess that interrupts the stream, so I'm very, very sorry.
That's okay.
To answer your question, I was saying that Oshawa is a really interesting place, and at the doors, there's just a lot of, it's changed dramatically. So a week ago, last weekend, I would say, people were like, an election? Really? Like, they couldn't believe it. They hadn't really heard rumblings. And I think that's interesting because, again, when you're super looped into political, Twitter or just in general, we knew it was coming. We just weren't sure when. And we were really hoping that it wasn't. But again, we figured it would. And this weekend, and even towards the end of the week, folks were just exasperated. They're frustrated. And, I echo so much of what was said because they don't want this. They didn't ask for it. You had some people who heard the talking points, oh, things are being blocked. Not quite, but I understand why folks would say that because it's an easy way out when you're talking about a minority government. And truthfully, there is a vast misunderstanding of how, politics and legislation and the passing of legislation happens and the role the Senate plays. That alone is hugely confusing for folks. And I think, you know, that speaks volumes on how poorly we've done making politics accessible. Sorry, we're on a main street downtown, which is fantastic until you get people revving their cars. So, you know, in Oshawa, our problems are really, really exasperated. We had a ton of folks from the GTA surrounding region come to Oshawa who were underhoused, who were dealing with severe addictions and mental health needs, who were told that Oshawa was the place to go to get help. And it's true, we have some fantastic infrastructure here that continued to run throughout the pandemic. But I would be lying if I said that it was adequate, if it was sustainable, and if it was infrastructure built to really, really bring out the best in people and set them up for success. It was band-aid solutions to a hugely systemic problem. And before you even add in the different equity intersections into who it is that we are not serving, it is incredibly telling in even the neighborhoods that have been canvassed so far by other candidates in this riding. And it's really disappointing to see, because there is an entire south end of our city who are the disenfranchised, not by choice, though they may say by choice, but they have been strategically and systemically excluded from what we have done. And they are struggling and suffering. And then you have folks in the central and northern parts, and Oshawa is developing very, very quickly. To paint a picture, you know, I think we had the fastest growth in the province, but also I think at one point in the country, because our north end is evolving so quickly. So you have the average house north, just outside of our riding, into the Durham O'Toole riding, which is also still the city of Oshawa. You have the average house selling for well over $1 million there. And then you come 15, not even minutes south of that, and you have folks living in our Memorial Park, who there's not enough social housing, there's not enough affordable housing because we haven't built any in the last 20 something years. You have folks who've lost their jobs. You have schools that are overpopulated to begin with, that aren't being funded adequately at the provincial level. So, you know, you have overcrowding of students. There's a huge divide between people who can stay at home with kids, who can't stay at home with kids, who have to make that decision to send folks back. There's a climate emergency. We know that. We have a waterfront that we import that needs our attention, that deserves our attention, that isn't getting it, that hasn't gotten it. We've got a municipal government that isn't progressive and is frankly overburdened and I think in over their heads with the systemic solutions that are needed, that are not making enough noise provincially or federally to get funding. We've got an MP that's been largely silent about it and hasn't advocated for 17 years. You have people who are new to the city, who are from Toronto because it's more affordable than what they're used to, who typically vote Liberal or NDP, who are looking for home and are looking for the strategic vote, which is NDP in Oshawa. So we are battling a couple of different things, as most ridings are. But again, there's that underbelly, that undertone of we need change. And folks aren't sure necessarily what that's going to look like, but they know it's needed. And they're willing to take a leap. And so I'm grateful and thankful that at the very least, throughout this pandemic, people are angry. And yes, they're exhausted, but if we can channel that anger and that passion into an action, whether it be getting out the vote or, you know, putting a lawn sign down or volunteering or just sharing their opinions with someone at the door, it is something that I think we take for granted when people share their thoughts and opinions with us and trust us. As was said earlier, you know, put that trust in you that you are going to take their story, their experience, and you are going to represent it in a way that is authentic and reflective of them, their vision, and their needs. And I don't think I've been at a door where I haven't been able to find some value that we can connect with, even if there are people who are not going to vote for me because of XYZ. There is always a root value that we intrinsically share and believe in, and that is the power of human connection. And so it's in Oshawa right now, it's more about that connection than it is about the partisanship, but also it is a push for change because we have had the same representation for so long. So we don't even have to talk about partisanship necessarily. People are very impressed with Jagmeet. People are very impressed with what the NDP has done if they're aware of it. But ultimately, people are angrier at Trudeau than I think he and the Liberals are willing to acknowledge. There are a lot of not nice stickers and flags flying around. People are not afraid to showcase that, and not that I want to capitalize off of it because, directing hatred usually is based in fear. But certainly, you have to acknowledge people's pain and emotion before you can ever hope to channel it into change. So it's a little tidbit of Oshawa. That's the tip of our iceberg.
No, and thank you so much for sharing it. I think you touch on something that that a lot of us are thinking about right now, and that is that anger and that dissatisfaction with with looking at how the government has operated in 6 years. 4 years a majority, and two now as a minority. People have a lot of rights to be angry at Justin Trudeau and at the government. And it's a confluence of federal government failing here in Ontario, the provincial government failing, our local leaders being defunded to the point where they're unable to function. Municipalities, regional councils, they cannot function. They absolutely cannot function to serve the people. So you have such this hang up of neoliberalism and trickle down where government has been reduced so much that it can no longer serve the needs of people. And it's how we end up in these situations with housing affordability. We have issues of schools falling apart. Our roads aren't nice. There are so many systemic barriers to people, and that's what people see every day. They see it in their wallet or in their pocketbook. They see it in their kitchens. They see it in their neighborhoods. They see it in their schools. They see it in their public institutions. What's the point of having a government if the government can't take care of you? Who's supposed to? Who's that failsafe? So I think all governments have completely failed people, and people are righteously angry, and they have a right to be angry. And again, you're absolutely right, Shailene. It's not to it's not to channel that anger, which you could, but to take that anger and understand that it comes from a place of need, that if the community is not served by the government, then the government needs to step up and serve the needs of the people. That's what democracy means, right? Ruled by the people. At the end of the day, it's the will of the people that needs to be respected by government, and it's not been done. It's not been done by Justin Trudeau. It's not been done by Doug Ford. Hasn't been done. It hasn't been able to be done by our municipal leaders, who should be the direct our direct connection to government services. Should be our regional councils and municipalities, our trustees and the school boards. Those are our direct lines to governance. And if that's not working, then it's not working, and there's a serious problem. It's getting kind of late, and I know that you're both candidates for the upcoming election, which is September 20th. And everyone who's listening right now should double check to make sure that they're registered to vote. You don't necessarily need to be, but you can go to the Elections Canada website, punch in some information, and they'll make sure that you're on the roll. You can reach out to Beisan's campaign in Kitchener Centre. I believe it is beisanzubi.ca.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
And
Beisan.
And Shailene's website for Oshawa NDP is ShailenePanylo.ca.
ShailenePanylo.ndp.ca.
.ndp.ca. Okay, I would have messed it up if I tried it. Thank you very much.
That's okay. No worries.
These are very busy times, and if you look in the link to the description of this video on YouTube, I've linked to everyone's social media and as well as their campaign websites. Give it a check it out. volunteer if you can, make some calls. One of the things that's interesting about pandemic campaigning is that you could, in one day, feasibly make phone calls for Beisan Zubi in Kitchener Center and turn around and make calls for Shailene Panylo in Oshawa in the same day. You
The
can reach
magic
out
of
to those.
Call Hub.
It's a fantastic thing. It's really,
Wow.
really easy to do. You can help out and get these fantastic people elected and representing the needs of working people who understand what's going on in our communities. It's really, really exciting, and I'm so happy that you agreed to spend some time with me tonight. This is a really, really exciting time. I hope you come back sometime. Maybe we'll do a mid-campaign check-in with the two of you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I want to ask one last question before we say goodnight. And it is, what is something about yourself, maybe something you're interested in or something you do that most people don't know? And
I'll go
Beisan.
first just because, I mean, people actually do know, but I used to foster dogs. They come in from Mexico through Pearson Airport. And Luna is my foster to adopt dog. And I did see in the chat that there was a request for more dogs. So I am fulfilling that request. And yes, she's a very sweet girl.
Working for the people.
You
The
know
people
what I mean?
want the dog.
Dog. Honestly, you go out canvassing with a puppy. You don't want to go door knocking. That's too much. But if you're just like in a park, people will come to you. It's amazing. So yeah, she's a little bit of a secret weapon and just the cute bomb. But a thing I guess about me that people don't know is that I speak English, Arabic, and French. So I think, I don't know, maybe people will know that, but that's a hard one. I don't know. I feel like I'm not really super. I'm pretty basic, like on the surface, like everything is what it is. But yeah.
And
It's just the dog. Like honestly, this is like the best that I can offer.
We're
Situation.
100% here for it. Everyone loves dog content here on the channel. Shailene, maybe same question. What's something funny or something that people don't know about you?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. I feel like I'm a pretty open book. I mean, I have to steal my sister's dog because I don't have one of my own. I do have a hamster, but it's not the same as furry cuddles. But I think my random fact, I mean, I'm a huge like anime nerd. So if folks, I finally figured out how to open the chat, folks, so I can see what you're saying. Also, thank you for all the nice comments about the painting and the background. That was very nice. I'm late to acknowledge it, but no, I'm a huge anime nerd, and something that I definitely missed this year, aside from Caravana and last year, would be like Toronto Comic Con and Fan Expo and all that good stuff. It's sort of an escape for me, so I do quite enjoy that. And since we're talking languages, 2 years ago today, actually, or 3 years ago today, I was on a plane heading to Japan for the first time to work there for just under a month and, study the language. So a little bit sad to have seen that memory pop up, but definitely a huge nerd and love anime and webtoons and manga. So if folks watching have recommendations, I, on Twitter, am always looking for them and will often tweet asking for new recommendations. So let's connect. It's sort of my escapism. That's my genre of choice. But yeah, that's my fun fact niche. Did you know?
No, that's fantastic. I've always wanted to have a panel where I got to ask that question, so it's good. I've moderated debates before as well, and I never got to ask it. But I'll just close in saying thank you so much for spending some time with us. We hope to see you again. Wish you all the best, all the good footwear. Take the time. There we go. Those are great. Those are great shoes. Great shoes. A shout out to Brian Chang, who's in the chat tonight. Brian Chang
Hi,
is running.
Brian.
Brian Chang is running in Toronto Center. And Brian is a fantastic person and a great friend to the show. So make sure you check out all of Brian Chang's materials as well. And maybe Brian will come on the show later this week. Who knows? This is my formal ask, Brian. But we'll talk later. And thank you both, Beisan Zubi, Kitchener Center NDP, and Shailene Panylo, Oshawa NDP. Thank you so much for being here, and all the best in the next 30 some odd days.
Thank you, Sean. It's nice to meet you.
Yes,
all right,
thanks
take
so
care,
much,
everyone.
Nice to meet you. Bye.
Bye. Go knock doors tomorrow, everybody.